To enhance the pencil sketch, I repainted the lines using thinned down burnt umber. This was to ensure that when I painted the surrounding areas, the lines wouldn't dissolve into the paint. In my case, thorough sketching is very important because it saves me a lot of time later on. Having everything figured out in the beginning, including the compositions, give me a clear idea of how to plan the painting accordingly. I started working on the background of the painting. The background didn't need to be detailed. It was a soft, blurry scene set in the morning. As we can see here, the light was shining from right to left, making the left hand side slightly darker than the right hand side of the canvas. At this stage, I was just testing the colors and wasn't completely satisfied with my choice, still figuring things out. Normally, it takes me a few layers before I can get it just right. The initial stage of the painting is always tough for me as I work to figure out the flow. That's why I avoid important details like the hair in this case early on. The background is easy to adjust and won't cause long-term issues, making it a great way to warm up before tackling the more detailed parts. For the lower half of the background, I used ultramarine blue mixed with white, yellow ochre, and transparent earth yellow. It didn't need to be specific as we aim to achieve an out-of-focus effect. I started working on the hare's ears. I began with the underpainting of the hare's ears. For the outer part of the ears, I used an earthy color mix of burnt umber, ultramarine blue, raw sienna, burnt sienna, and white. I roughly painted the soft cartilage of the ear and the inner part of the ear flap. I decided to change the top left of the background by painting an out-of-focus scrub behind the hair. I used warm white, yellow ochre, and burnt umber for this task. In the top left of the background, I added more warm white mixed with oil because I felt that part was a bit too dark. I didn't like how the background scrub turned out, so I blended everything together. I think I liked it better that way. I continue working on the hare's left ear. The inside of the ear flap looked like sunlight was shining through it, revealing the veins and giving it an orange-yellowish tint. To achieve this effect, I used transparent orange mixed with cadmium yellow light. left ear was drying, I began working on the right ear as well. Similarly, I mixed transparent orange with yellow for the ear flap. For the outer part of the ear, I used a mix of burnt umber, ultramarine blue, raw sienna, burnt sienna, and white. I then mixed burnt umber, yellow ochre, and raw sienna with a generous amount of paint thinner to create the underpainting of the hare's head and body. I started adding details to the left ear where the inside is visible. Using a small round brush, I added tiny hairs around the edges of the ear. I then used cadmium red light to create the invisible veins on the ear flap. Similarly, I used different shades of red for the veins of the right ear, cadmium red light mixed with transparent orange, and perylene red. I used titanium buff with a small round brush. I created tiny hairs throughout the ear flap. Since the paint on the right ear was still a bit wet, I started working on the hare's eye. For the pupil of the eye, I used black. I didn't like the colors I was using for the eye. I used warm white to depict the highlights on the edge of the ear. For the lower part of the ear, we could see some white fur growing. However, since it was in the shade, I used titanium buff for it. Here I used raw umber to create the dark background and then painted light gray on top. For the whole face, I used two small round brushes, one for the dark fur and another one for lighter fur. The shades I used for the face were raw umber, light gray, titanium buff, and a mix of titanium buff and raw umber. Since the face was in the shade, I didn't want to make it too light. Instead, I toned down the shade a bit, which would make it easier to add highlights later. The back of the head was where the light hit, so I used warm white for the highlights. I started working on the body. For the left side, the fur has a slightly pinkish brown hue. So I tried mixing red and burnt umber with white. However, it didn't feel quite right. I continued with the rest of the body, using burnt umber for the dark fur and titanium buff for the lighter fur. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I attempted to paint the eye again. I used cadmium lemon to paint around the pupil of the eye. I used cobalt teal for the lower half of the pupil where there was a reflection of light from the background. For the outer part of the eye, I used a mix of raw sienna and burnt sienna. Now that the paint had dried, it was easier to add further highlights to the ears. I was dissatisfied with how the body fur turned out, so I experimented with mixing a different shade for it. I mixed cadmium yellow light, cadmium red light, and ultramarine blue to create a brown shade. I used this shade as a base color, and for areas that require a bit of a pinkish tone, I added a touch of white and red. I still use titanium buff for the highlights in the body fur. I thought this brown color was better than the previous one. I added highlights to the back of the body where the fur caught the light. Adding the whiskers was the final touch. It always stresses me out because they need to be fine, and it's quite challenging to achieve that with a brush. Let's take a look at the finished painting. Thank you for watching.